Hey guys, tonight we're diving into the charmingly questionable world of 18th century Parisian dentistry, where smiles where powdered molars were menaced, and you could lose a tooth faster than your dignity at a powdered wig party. We're not talking about floss and fluoride here. No, tonight you'll step into a candlelit alley off Rue Mouffetard, where the local tooth puller offers you something between a consultation and a dare. You'll sit down in a rickety chair that groans louder than you do. And before you know it, well, let's just say anesthesia is still about 100 years away. You probably won't survive this dental appointment, but don't worry. It'll be historically accurate. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, drop your location and local time in the comments. I love seeing where and when folks are listening from. Now dim, the lights maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. Your eyes blink open to the familiar ceiling beams of your modest Paris flat, where cold air curls beneath the shutters and the smell of stale breadwood smoke and vaguely unwashed laundry hangs lazily in the air. The bells of Saint-Étienne-du-Mont chime softly in the distance, but you're not interested in time. You're interested in pain. Specifically a pain pulsing just behind your left cheekbone, dull and rhythmic, like a particularly grumpy drummer lodged inside your mouth. You groan gently, prod your jaw, and wince. It's official. Your molar has betrayed you. You pull yourself out of bed, wrap your shawl around your shoulders, and make your way to the washstand where the water is cold enough to startle a confession out of a cardinal. There's no toothpaste here, just a rag, a bowl, and maybe some salt if you're lucky. You swish. You gag. You confirm that your breath could be used to clear a small salon. Paris in 1774 may be the fashion capital of Europe, but oral hygiene is more of a hopeful theory. Outside, the streets are muddy and bustling, filled with early vendors, gossiping laundresses, and a man yelling about turnips with frankly inappropriate passion. You clutch your coin purse and begin the long, uncomfortable walk to the local tooth barber part, surgeon part, neighborhood hazard. Historians still argue whether these early dental practitioners truly saw themselves as healers or simply as tradesmen with strong arms and a decent tolerance for screaming. But one thing's certain, if you lived in 18th century Paris and you had a toothache, you didn't go to a dentist. You went to someone with pliers and enthusiasm. You turn down Rue des Ursulines, where the cobblestones are uneven and a suspicious puddle seems to follow you. At the corner is a shop with a faded sign of a smiling man holding a tooth the size of a fist. You take a deep breath, push open the door, and step inside. The smell hits first cloves, vinegar, old pipe smoke, and whatever dreams teeth have when they die. A bell tinkles overhead. The shop is small, cluttered with chairs, towels, and a cabinet full of tools that look more appropriate for horse maintenance than human care. The barber appears from behind a curtain, wiping his hands on a towel that may have once been white. His mustache curls slightly at the ends. His eyes are kind in the way a cat's eyes are kind, right before it pounces. "Ah, une douleur?" he asks, already reaching for his tool roll. You nod. Back molar. He gestures to a chair that creaks as you sit. It's angled under the window so the light hits your face more for his benefit than yours. He pries your mouth open with practiced ease, mutters something about swelling and tuts 3 times. You can't tell if that's a good sign or just the soundtrack of 18th century diagnosis. He begins to prepare. There's no numbing, no disinfectant, no gentle pat on the shoulder. Just a long metal key-shaped device called a pelican, which he selects with a grunt of satisfaction. It looks vaguely like something you'd use to unscrew fate. He tilts your head back, braces your jaw, and mutters, "Try not to scream too early," and you try. You really do. But the pain shoots through your skull like a comet made of fire and regret. You kick. You flail. You may briefly black out. When it's over, he holds up the tooth like a prize and grins. There's applause probably from your ancestors watching in horror. You're handed a rag to bite down on, and a few drops of laudanum to calm the blood. You pay wobble out the door and blink into the light. Paris continues around you. The baker is selling brioche, the nuns are herding orphans, and somewhere a violin is playing softly. Life goes on, molar or not. You make your way home, tongue poking the new gap in your mouth, wondering vaguely if the ache in your head is from the extraction or the idea that someone thought this was a good system. To be fair, people did the best they could. Sort of. There was no dental school, not yet. No governing body to check tool cleanliness. No regulation about what passed for expertise. A steady hand and a chair by the window that made you a professional. Still, you can't help but wonder what else are they getting wrong. As your jaw throbs and the laudanum gently hums through your bloodstream, you begin to drift off in your chair, wondering what fresh horrors your next appointment might bring. The day after your tooth extraction is what might generously be called a foggy one. You wake with a crumpled blanket, a swollen jaw, and the uneasy sensation that your pillow may now count as medical waste. Your tongue is busy exploring the new hole in your mouth like an overly curious house guest, and each poke sends a jolt of regret through your skull. Still you rise. This is Paris. Even your molars are expected to maintain a certain social schedule. Your mouth tastes faintly of metal shame and cloves. Clove oil, as it turns out, is the Parisian panacea for every oral woe. Tooth hurts clove oil. Gums bleed clove oil. Accidentally kiss the wrong nobleman's daughter. Maybe try clove oil anyway. You shuffle down the narrow stairwell from your flat, trailing your fingers along the wall for balance. Each step echoes in your skull. You've decided, perhaps unwisely, that you need a second opinion, or at the very least, someone to tell you your jaw won't fall off. This time, you visit a different kind of practitioner. Down the Rue de la Harpe, past the ironmonger and the violin shop that never seems to sell anything, you find a tiny storefront wedged between a bookbinder and a bakery. A wooden sign above reads, "Dentiste esthétique," in careful script with a carving of a cherub holding a toothbrush, a tool that at this point in time is more decorative than functional. Inside, the air smells of lavender wax and secrets. You're greeted by a man in a powdered wig, tall enough to hide state secrets and cheeks rouged like a flirtatious tomato. He offers you a shallow bow. "Bienvenue," he purrs, "to the future of dental grace." You don't entirely trust him. His salon is pristine, filled with cushioned chairs, velvet drapes, and an alarming number of reflective surfaces. You can see your own pale, puffy-cheeked face from at least 4 angles. You resemble a melancholic turnip. "Please," he says, motioning to a seat shaped like an overstuffed walnut. "Tell me what troubles your magnificent visage." You explain. Slowly, through a wince. He listens with exaggerated sympathy, nodding at all the right moments and murmuring things like très tragique, and a betrayal of enamel. Then he unveils his tools. Now, unlike the barber surgeon's kit rough honest and suspiciously stained, these instruments are dainty, polished, engraved with initials. One appears to be made of mother of pearl. Another resembles a pastry fork. They're beautiful. They're also completely useless. He begins by examining your jaw with a small, delicate mirror mounted on a silver stick. Then he dabs something on your gums, a paste that tingles and tastes like mentholated failure. Finally, he removes a long, thin hook and spends 5 careful minutes doing something that seems to involve massaging your molars like they're delicate cheeses. You resist the urge to ask if any of this is helping. Historians still argue whether these aesthetic dentists were legitimate practitioners or clever con artists with silk waistcoats. In truth, it was probably both. Paris in the 1700s was a place where image mattered more than function, where appearance often trumped actual care. A well-dressed dentist with nice teeth, usually fake, could command higher fees than a competent one who smelled faintly of blood and potatoes. Your charming tooth barber finishes the examination with a flourish, wiping his hands with a scented cloth. Your extraction was enthusiastic, he says, peering at your jaw. But I see no infection. Perhaps a rinse. He presents you with a goblet of something pale and vaguely minty. You sip. Immediately regret it. It tastes like old flowers and floor cleaner. He beams. Cleansing. Very modern. You pay, of course. Twice what you paid the first man. You leave the salon with a numb tongue, a dry mouth, and a complimentary packet of tooth powder which smells like crushed lilies and mild despair. Outside, the air feels sharper. The sun has climbed higher, casting long shadows on the cobblestones. A carriage splashes past, narrowly missing your boots. You find a bench near the edge of the square and sit, letting the sounds of Paris wash over you, the clatter of hooves, the calls of vendors, the distant trill of a flute. You open the packet of tooth powder and inspect it. Fine, white, fragrant. It's meant to be dabbed onto the teeth with a cloth and buffed gently. You give it a try. The result is gritty. You feel like you've just brushed with crushed seashells and regret. It's all part of the ritual, though. Clean teeth, at least the front ones, are fashionable now, especially among the elite. Discoloration is frowned upon. Missing teeth are hidden. Smiles are staged lips closed just enough to suggest mystery, not molarlessness. You pass a woman wearing a gown so wide she must turn sideways to enter doorways. She gives you a curt nod, her teeth perfectly straight and blindingly white. They are also unmistakably not hers. But that's a concern for another day. For now, you've done what you could. 2 experts, 2 very different conclusions. 1 pair of aching jaws and a slightly emptier coin purse. You pat Wojtek's herb pouch. Oh, wait, wrong storyline. You pat your coat reassured by the rattle of coins and the crunch of the old clove you accidentally pocketed from the first shop. You walk home slowly past bakeries and perfumeries and a man selling scarves shaped like crocodiles, possibly not historically accurate, but wouldn't that be charming? Your jaw still aches, but you feel oddly accomplished. You survived 2 dental visits. You only cried once, and you still have most of your teeth. For now. You wake the next morning with a dull sense of optimism, foolish, really, but understandable. The swelling in your jaw has eased to the point where you no longer look like you've smuggled a plum in your cheek, and for the first time in days, you think you might choose something more adventurous than bread soaked in broth. Life is full of hope, until you remember the tools, not your tools, theirs. You pull the covers back over your head, but memory doesn't care about blankets. You see them in your mind, lined up neatly on the counter of the barber's dimly lit shop or gleaming under the salon's scented candles like sinister cutlery. Hooks, pliers, little scoops, strange metal claws. Some of them engraved, most of them designed with more confidence than competence. You sit up with a groan. If you're going to understand what went wrong with Parisian dentistry, you might as well start with the instruments. And the best place for that is the Hôtel de Dieu, the city's main hospital, or more accurately, its ongoing experiment in how many patients can share a single bed before someone gets stepped on. Historians still argue whether 18th century hospitals helped more than they harmed. Some see them as essential centers of care and learning. Others describe them as glorified warehouses for the unwell, more focused on appearances than actual healing. The truth, as ever, likely wobbles in between. You arrive at the Hôtel de Dieu's teaching wing, really just a wing of corridors with occasional candles and an alarming smell of boiled cloth. Here, a young assistant agrees to show you the surgical instruments used by the medical faculty. You brace yourself. The display cabinet is impressive, also terrifying. You see a tooth key, a thick T-shaped device used to wrench teeth out of sockets with a twist, like opening a particularly unpleasant wine bottle. Some have wooden handles worn smooth by years of gripped panic. Some are rusted at the hinge. One still has a smear of something you hope is rust. Elegant no, says the assistant proudly. You try not to faint. The tooth key wasn't alone in this horror show. There were pelicans named in a twist of poetic cruelty for their resemblance to the bird's beak used to clamp and lever out molars. Forceps, often misaligned from overuse, promised precision, but more often snapped tooth roots in half. And then for delicate gum sculpting, there were sharp curettes and scalpels designed to reshape the mouth. There's a reason 18th century French patients often brought friends to hold them down. You learn that these tools weren't just used by professionals. They were sold in markets, hawked by traveling peddlers, and sometimes built at home by enterprising barbers who thought, why not add molar removal to my shaving services? Many of the tools were passed down through families. Some were even customized. One tooth key in the collection has an ivory handle and an engraving that reads simply, "For emergencies." You can only imagine what kind of emergency calls for a personalized molar wrench. The assistant, seeing your pale face, offers you a peppermint lozenge. It tastes like soap and panic. Afterward, you walk the long way home, trying to mentally file away what you've seen without vomiting in a public square. You pass a baker, the scent of fresh bread tempting enough to risk chewing again. You buy a roll, take a careful bite, and miraculously your teeth hold. You wonder how many Parisians made it to old age with all their teeth intact. Probably not many. It's a world of sugar-laced treats, poor hygiene and dental instruments better suited to medieval siege warfare. But the funny thing is, they believed in them. They trusted the tools, and by extension, the people who wielded them. You were in pain. You went to someone with a pelican and a confident mustache. What else could you do? There were no x-rays, no sterilization, No dental charts with little blue ink teeth and confusing codes, just a chair, a tool, and a prayer. You remember reading about a woman who had 9 teeth removed in a single sitting. No anesthesia. She reportedly fainted halfway through but came back around in time for the last 3. They said she was lucky. Fringe accounts mentioned street extractions, barbers, performing right in the square surrounded by cheering crowds. Some even used music to drown out the screams. One enterprising fellow played the fiddle while pulling bicuspids. Another worked beside a puppet show to distract children and onlookers alike. Were these performances absolutely? Were they effective? Debatable. You return home, toss your coat onto the chair, and collapse onto your lumpy bed, staring at the ceiling. It's strange to think how far people would go for relief. Even stranger to think how little their tools changed for almost a century. Parisian dentists kept faith in their twisted metal miracles, despite results that ranged from barely tolerable to please bring the priest. Later that night, you catch your reflection in a mirror. You smile tentatively. Still there, mostly straight, a little swollen, not bad considering. You think of the gleaming tooth keys, the clamping pelicans, the polished forceps, and you make a note silently and with great conviction to avoid anything that calls itself multi-use, especially if it resembles a bird. The next morning, you rise slowly, stretching limbs that feel like they've been through a very polite duel. Your jaw, however, no longer pulses with the same dear heavens, what have I done energy. It's downgraded to a polite throb. Progress. You decide to celebrate this minor victory, the only way a slightly bruised Parisian can, by wandering into the fashionable side of town, where people still think powdered wigs are a good idea, and where salons promise beauty civility and light dental miracles. You take a left off Rue Saint-Honoré and pass 3 perfumeries, a hat boutique shaped like a duck, and finally arrive at your destination, a high-end dental salon known as Le Rire Brillant, the Brilliant Smile. The name alone suggests equal parts elegance and overconfidence. Inside, you're greeted by a woman in silk gloves holding a long feathered duster and a not-so-subtle look of appraisal. "You are here for?" she asks, her voice as light as sugar and just as artificial. "A cleaning, you say, and watch as her expression brightens. She claps once and disappears behind a velvet curtain, returning with a man who looks like he just stepped out of a painting and possibly into a bottle of lavender cologne. He bows. His shoes click. His teeth gleam. You're ushered into a plush chair that reclines with a satisfying squeak and a slight tilt that suggests no one's really fixed the back leg in some time. Candles flicker on gilded sconces, and a polished brass mirror reflects your dubious expression back at you. This is not medicine. This is theater. The tools he presents are much finer than what you've seen before. Ivory-handled scrapers, soft bristle brushes, a glass bowl filled with what appears to be minty powder, and a silver bowl, your spit receptacle perched on a folding stand with the same delicacy usually reserved for wine at court. You're asked to tilt your head open wide and relax. You do none of these things successfully. He begins by brushing slow, careful circles with a brush that smells of rosemary and something vaguely medicinal. Then comes the powder dabbed onto your front teeth with a cloth and rubbed until you feel you might polish your way straight through enamel. He pauses often to let you rinse and spit. The bowl gleams, catching your reflection at odd angles. You realize that this entire process is about appearance, not comfort. He wants you to feel clean, fashionable, slightly fancy, not necessarily better. Historians still debate whether salons like these truly helped oral health or simply masked its decline with powder scent and illusion. Many believe they contributed to a culture of concealment where bad breath and decay were covered, not cured. Aesthetic triumph over anatomical reality. You glance around the room. On a nearby table lies a small stack of pamphlets, brochures promoting tooth tonics for the elegant essences of orchid breath, and one particularly optimistic one labeled Elixir of Eternal Freshness. You imagine it tastes like regret and violets. As the cleaning continues, the dentist offers tips with the air of someone who once gave hygiene advice to a prince. "Brush twice daily," he murmurs, "with lemon peel and salt, and a dash of charcoal if you're attending a ball." You nod. You would nod harder if he weren't currently using a hooked implement to investigate your molars. The French, he continues, have the most dazzling smiles in Europe. It is known. You want to ask who decided that, but your mouth is full of mint paste. Eventually, he applies a final rinse, astringent floral and slightly sparkly, and dabs your lips with a lace-trimmed cloth. You sit up slowly, blinking at your reflection. Your teeth do look whiter, sort of. The same way powdered wigs look natural. You pay more than you should and are handed a complimentary tin of dentifrice de la Rose. The label features a woman smiling delicately behind a fan. You doubt she used it more than once. As you step outside, the air hits you like a reset button. Gone is the scent of lavender and mint. Instead, Paris offers you roasted chestnuts, chimney soot, and the occasional whiff of sewer. You walk slowly, mouth-tingling, feeling halfway between a mannequin and a mint sprig. You duck into a cafe, order a warm cider, and listen as two women at the next table discuss the newest tooth fashion they've heard about: enameled teeth painted gold for special events. "Very Versailles," one says. "Très moderne." You sip your drink. Gently. Gold teeth were indeed a thing. Sometimes inlaid, sometimes painted, sometimes attached with wire and hope. They didn't last. But for a while, the illusion of wealth extended into the mouth, and no one questioned it. If you could afford a diamond-studded shoe buckle, why not a molar that sparkled? You pass a mirror on your way out of the cafe and catch your reflection again, still shiny, still faintly floral. But beneath the surface, you can feel it, that vague tenderness, the persistent ache, the subtle reminder that all the powder in the world can't fix a rotten root. You head home under the slowly falling twilight, the city glowing with lanterns, the cobblestones shining with a thin sheen of mist. Paris hums. Carriages rattle. A violin plays somewhere above you, off-key but determined. Your teeth chatter slightly, not from cold, but from the lingering menthol buzz of fashionable cleanliness. And as you climb the stairs to your flat, the mint still clinging to your lips, you make a note. You don't need rose-scented spit bowls. You need real answers. The next day, you swear off salons. Temporarily. Because your mouth still feels like it's recovering from a romantic encounter with a mint factory and a whisk broom, and you've begun to suspect that all of this, every gleaming smile, every perfumed rinse, every dainty scraping, is more show than substance, which, to be fair, is very Paris. But you still have questions. So like any curious 18th century citizen with a swollen jaw and time to spare, you take a detour through the Marché des Innocents, the local marketplace where rumors, vegetables, and dubious remedies all circulate in equal measure. There, tucked between a spice vendor and a woman selling velvet garters, you find a stall that claims to sell true elixirs for the teeth and breath. The proprietor is a man with a spectacular mustache and the air of someone who once lost a bet to a pharmacist. He waves you over. You look like a person of refined mouth. Just had mine refurbished, you reply. He grins, revealing a collection of teeth that resemble various stages of history. Then allow me to offer you something new, something scientific. He produces a jar filled with a glimmering silver paste. Mercury, he whispers as though offering a secret. The latest in tooth care. Smooth, elegant, and absolutely modern. You blink. Mercury. Like the metal. Exactly, he says proudly. Mixed with crushed coral and mint. Nothing clears decay like a touch of quicksilver. You stare at the jar. It glows, faintly, like it's thinking about becoming sentient. Historians still argue whether mercury was genuinely believed to clean teeth, or whether it was simply a byproduct of using whatever looked shiny and vaguely medicinal. It had been used in ointments and cosmetic creams for years. Why not mouths? After all, a little shimmer was fashionable, and if it made your teeth tingle, surely it was working. You politely decline the purchase and instead buy a small tin of clove charcoal paste that seems slightly less likely to slowly kill you. The vendor nods solemnly. A wise choice, he says, but not as fashionable, which of course is the eternal Parisian dilemma, health or fashion. You walk on, chewing a sliver of clove to clear the taste of salesmanship from your tongue, and think back to something you overheard at the cafe the day before someone mentioned a lady at court who swears by a mixture of egg whites and vinegar for whitening teeth. Another reportedly uses burnt breadcrumbs mixed with honey. Fringe tooth recipes were everywhere in 18th century Paris. Some were passed down like heirlooms. Others were copied from apothecary walls. Many included ingredients best suited to cleaning copper pots, ground oyster shells, alum pulverized bone, or even brick dust. Some actually worked mild abrasives mostly, but many just wore the enamel away faster than the dentist could catch up. You pause at a bookseller's stall, flipping through a slim volume of household hygiene remedies. In the section labeled Dents, you find gems like apply lemon juice for gleaming white enamel, may cause shriveling of gum. To remove stubborn rot rub with spirits of wine and rinse in vinegar. Repeat until discomfort silences. A powdered combination of mint and alum may preserve breath for moments of intimacy. You buy the book. Mostly for the line drawings, which include a woman brushing her teeth with what appears to be a goose feather. That evening, back in your flat, you sit by the flickering firelight and open your new tin of clove charcoal paste. You dip a cloth into the powder and begin rubbing it gently across your front teeth. The taste is earthy, slightly bitter, and surprisingly tolerable. Your teeth feel cleaner, even if you now look like you've chewed a very old log. You rinse. You spit. The basin looks like the aftermath of a tiny fireplace collapse. Still, your mouth feels refreshed. Not minty fresh, just genuinely cleaner, less perfumed, more honest. You stare at the tiny mirror on your windowsill and smile. Not glamorous, not powdered, but real. Somewhere nearby, a church bell tolls. Below, the street hums with the usual sounds, carts, shouting vendors, distant laughter. A cat meows theatrically, then disappears into the shadows. You sit quietly, book in lap brushing powder off your sleeves, and think about how much effort this city puts into smiling and how little it knows about what's behind the smile. And yet, it tries. They all try. They brush with burnt bread. They rinse with vinegar. they polish with mercury. And maybe in some candlelit salon on the Rue Royale, a lady in satin is doing the same thing right now, wincing as she dabs a silver paste on her aching molar, whispering, "Beauty is pain," to herself through gritted, shimmering teeth. You lean back in your chair, the fire crackling softly, your mouth tingling with clove and charcoal, and wonder what tomorrow's remedy will be. Hopefully not goose feathers. You wake with a start, half dreaming that something is wriggling in your tooth. You sit up in bed, heart-thudding, mouth clamped shut. The fire in the grate has long since gone cold, and the early morning chill creeps through the shutters like a curious cat. You press a finger gently to your cheek. No swelling, no pain, just that phantom feeling, something you can't quite shake. You rise, light a candle, and shuffle to the washstand. Rinse, swish, spit. Still nothing but clove and last night's regret. But the image from your dream remains tiny creatures squirming inside your molars, chewing tunnels like termites. It's ridiculous, obviously. Except in 18th century Paris, it's not. Because tonight you're going to learn about the tooth worm, one of the most persistent, oddly endearing, and entirely imaginary dental theories to ever gain traction in Europe. You wrap a shawl around your shoulders and head out into the half-light of the waking city. You're on your way to visit an apothecary near the Rue du Temple, an old man rumored to have a collection of preserved specimens and a fondness for long unsolicited explanations. The apothecary shop is exactly what you'd expect, all crooked shelves, dusty jars, and an air that smells like the back of a spice drawer. The man himself is hunched, bespectacled, and delighted to see someone under the age of 70 with all their teeth, more or less. When you mention the dream, he nods solemnly and gestures for you to sit on a tall, uncomfortable stool. The worm theory, he says, as if announcing the start of a very slow opera. Ancient, of course. Some say it came from Mesopotamia, others from early Greek medicine. But here in Paris, oh, it flourished. Because it made sense. And in a way it did. Toothaches were seen not just as decay, but as infestation. The pain, the worm biting, the swelling, the worm wriggling, the relief after a hot rinse or a pulled tooth, the worm fleeing. It was elegant. Wrong, but elegant. You glance around the shelves and spot one particularly suspicious jar labeled verre de dent. Inside floats a thin curled object, perhaps a root, perhaps a very unlucky earthworm. The apothecary sees your look and chuckles. "Boiled turnip fiber," he whispers. But convincing. You learn that practitioners would draw out the worm using special treatments, often cloves, smoke, or oil of vitriol, essentially sulfuric acid in perfume. In one particularly theatrical method, hot pepper was packed into a cavity and covered with wax. The idea was to irritate the worm until it surfaced like coaxing a mouse from a hole. Some barbers even claimed to see the worm during extractions. Historians still argue whether this was imagination showmanship or opportunistic misidentification of gum tissue. One fringe theory suggests some dentists planted bits of string or worm-like matter in cavities just to prove their skill post-extraction. You sip a strange tea offered by the apothecary, made of dried rose hips and something with a citrus bite, and wonder just how many people truly believed in these invisible gnawing creatures. Apparently quite a few. It lasted centuries after all. Only when microscopes and germ theory began creeping in toward the 19th century did people slowly, reluctantly begin to let go of the worm. But in your world, in this powdered, perfumed, tooth-wrangling Paris, the worm still has sway. As you thank the apothecary and step back into the street, your mind drifts to a pamphlet you saw once in a salon on the elimination of the tooth serpent. It featured a drawing of a man holding pliers and smiling smugly while a tiny worm squirmed above a disembodied molar. The caption read, "Vanquished with clove and Christian temperance." You walk past the bakery and pause. Pastries gleam in the window, crusted with sugar, dusted with powdered chocolate, filled with dreams. You eye a delicate eclair and imagine just for a second a smug little worm diving headfirst into its creamy center. You walk away. Back at your flat, you light a candle, settle into your lumpy chair, and reread your recently purchased hygiene booklet. Tucked between lemon juice advice and vinegar rinses, there's a tiny passage. For the extraction of tooth worms, apply steam of heated onion peel followed by wine and clove. Worms, if present, shall flee. You picture it. A desperate little worm clambering down your chin in a panic. Absurd, but vivid. You grin at your own foolishness even as you dab a bit of clove oil on your gums, just in case. Because as silly as the toothworm theory sounds, it gave people a story, a reason for their pain, something to blame. And sometimes a little fiction makes the reality easier to bear. You settle in for the night, jaw calm, for now the room dim and soft. Outside, the wind picks up. A distant dog barks once disapprovingly. You murmur good night, little worm, to the quiet air, just in case he's listening. You wake to the sound of spoons clinking and something being politely burned in a pan breakfast, presumably from the flat below. For once your jaw feels unremarkable. No pulsing, no tender ache, no phantom worms tap dancing on your molars. It's glorious. You stretch, yawn, and roll out of bed with the kind of cautious optimism usually reserved for actors checking whether they've missed their cue. Your feet find the cold floorboards, your hand finds the windowsill, and your nose finds the faintest trace of warm sugar drifting in from the boulangerie. That's when it hits you, sugar. The culprit. Not clove, not cold air, not phantom larvae. Sugar. You pull on your cloak and head for the Latin Quarter, home to booksellers, coffee houses, and a few loose-lipped confectioners. Today you're chasing sweets, or rather the elegant disaster they left in their wake across 18th century Paris. You arrive at a patisserie known locally as Le Doux Tombeau, the Sweet Tomb. The name, it turns out, is not ironic. The display is absurd. Glazed fruits, sugar sculptures, marzipan towers, and candied violets in tiny glass jars. It's not a shop. It's a shrine. And a surprisingly effective dental trap. You greet the proprietress, Madame Boniface, a woman with impossibly arched eyebrows and a mouth full of suspiciously perfect teeth. Natural, you ask? She pauses. Reliable, she replies, which answers nothing. You spend the better part of an hour sampling. Not out of greed, okay? Maybe a little, but in pursuit of understanding. You try spun sugar shaped like a swan's wing. Almond brittle so hard it might double as construction material. Raspberry glaze so sticky you suspect it's still coating your teeth, now, hours later. And that's the thing, Paris, in this golden powdered, absurdly polite century, is in love with sugar. Not just a flirtation, a full affair. A tooth-rotting saccharine seduction that knows no class boundaries. Nobles nibble candied oranges between courses. Merchants suck on barley drops at meetings. Even the poor chew on hard molasses sticks when they can get their hands on them. Historians still argue whether this explosion in sugar consumption directly correlates to the rise in tooth loss across France. It seems obvious, but records are inconsistent. What's clear is that from the mid-1700s onward, the mouth became a battlefield and sugar held the high ground. And here's where it gets interesting. Tooth decay became, paradoxically, a sign of wealth. Missing a few molars, it meant you could afford sweets, a mouthful of caries, proof of indulgence, like gout in your gums. Of course, no one said that aloud. Instead, they powdered their mouths with mint. They swirled clove-infused wine. They painted their teeth white with chalk paste. Some even resorted to tinted wax to fill the gaps, waxy little prosthetics that looked fine until you smiled too wide and one slipped out like a melancholy jelly bean. You finish your last sample, a sugared fig stuffed with spiced nuts, and thank Madame Boniface with a slightly gummy smile. She hands you a toothpick dipped in cinnamon. "You'll want that," she says with a knowing look. You step back onto the street, mouth buzzing, mind spinning. A short walk away, you pass a couple arguing in front of a perfume shop. He's accusing her of hoarding bonbons. She counters with, "At least I don't hide almond biscuits in my desk." You keep walking. At a bench near the fountain in Place Saint-Michel, you sit and watch the world go by. A powdered gentleman with a crooked wig adjusts his cravat while licking a sugar stick. A trio of women pass giggling behind handkerchiefs, one pulling from her reticule a small vial of peppermint spirit, likely to rinse after sweets. You can almost hear the molars crack. Fringe dental cures at the time included sugar-stabilizing rinses, usually a mixture of wine vinegar and crushed pearls. One recipe even called for the ashes of burnt sugar because naturally fighting sugar with sugar makes perfect sense. You make your way home just as twilight begins to blanket the rooftops. The baker's window is dark. The lamps are being lit. A thin fog is rising off the sand like a half-forgotten spell. You sit by your fire wrapped in your cloak, brushing your teeth slowly with the now familiar charcoal and clove powder. The sweetness of the day still lingers on your tongue, but the powder clears it, replacing it with earth and spice and something vaguely medicinal. You spit. You rinse. You smile. You've survived the day. Barely. You settle in for the night, curling under your blanket jaw, steady stomach, content mind, replaying images of powdered nobles gnawing elegantly on rock candy while trying to look disinterested. And as you drift off to sleep, you murmur a quiet vow. No more sugar swans. Well, maybe just one more. Tomorrow. You wake the next morning with breath that could peel wallpaper and a strange floral aftertaste on your tongue, like someone tried to bury a mint inside a bouquet and forgot to warn you. Which reminds you today is the day you dive into Paris's perfumed obsession with mouth scents. The powders, tinctures, lozenges, and sprays meant not to cure, but to camouflage. You rise, stretch, and rinse your mouth with tepid water and a splash of leftover herbal tea. The combination makes your gums sting and your nose wrinkle, but it's less awful than yesterday's clove overdose. Baby steps. After a bite of bread and a careful chewing session, you head down the Rue des Petits Champs toward one of the city's finer apothecaries, nestled between a ribbon shop and a printmaker whose window is filled entirely with drawings of fashionable elbows. You step inside the perfumer's lair where the air is thick with rose ambergris myrrh and crushed disappointment. A woman greets you, gloved and powdered her eyes bright behind a fan, decorated with scenes of hunting dogs and ambiguous flirtation. You seek freshness, she says. Not a question, a prophecy. She leads you to a display of jars, each labeled with elegant scrawl. Essence de menthe, poivre, peppermint, poudre d'iris and pearl, iris, and crushed pearl. Elixir de lilas, dew, sweet lilac. La brume du baiser, the kiss mist. You ask about function. She talks about fashion. This, she says, holding up a vial, will make your breath as sweet as spring rain falling on apricots. You ask if it prevents decay. She blinks once. It makes kisses more tolerable. You nod. That tracks. Historians still argue whether these perfumed powders served any real hygienic purpose. Some say they helped by encouraging more frequent mouth care, even if that care involved brushing with violet paste or rinsing with rose water and vinegar. Others claim they merely masked underlying problems, turning rotten breath into perfumed rotten breath. You try a lozenge made of anise clove and something sticky. It clings to your molars like ambition, tastes vaguely like licorice that's been stored in a drawer with someone's powdered wig. The shop assistant hands you a small tin of dentale discretion, a tooth powder mixed with dried herbs, floral essence, and finely crushed seashell. For your most whispered moments, she says, as if intimacy hinges entirely on mint and marine grit. You purchase it because of course you do. Out on the street again, you pause near a group of nobles leaning against a cafe railing. One of them, a viscount by the look of his embroidery, is regaling the others with a tale about a woman whose breath was so sweet it caused a duel. 3 men fought, he boasts. Only one walked away with the sachet she used. You decide not to ask follow-up questions. Back at home, you decide to experiment. You lay out the contents of your growing collection, the clove paste, the charcoal powder, the perfumed lozenges, the floral rinse, and the powdered iris mixture that now makes your kitchen smell like a cemetery for powdered wigs. You brush. You rinse. You powder. You suck on the lozenge. Your breath now smells like a forest in spring and also confusingly slightly of boiled cabbage. You look in the mirror. Your teeth look, well, the same. But now your mouth tastes like a scented letter written by someone with too many titles. It wasn't just nobles either. Parisian society across the spectrum had begun to embrace the idea that one's mouth aroma was as much a social signal as their hat height or perfume strength. To carry breath fresheners was a mark of civility. To use them, especially in company, was a performance of refinement. Some preferred dried petals soaked in vinegar and kept in pouches. Others chewed herbs, parsley, fennel, or thyme. And still others relied on chemical pastes, mixed with everything from burnt bread to powdered alabaster. One doctor even proposed a scent-infused toothpick designed to clean while subtly releasing jasmine. It didn't catch on, possibly because it also contained camphor and caused minor tongue numbness. You step out for a walk to test your new oral bouquet on the general public. A passing dog sneezes at you. A child asks if you smell like flowers on purpose. A fishmonger offers you a discount if you agree to stop breathing near the oysters. It's going well. You duck into a bookshop and strike up a conversation with the owner, an older man with half his original teeth and all of his curiosity. When you ask his thoughts on breath powders, he shrugs. Better than what came before. I remember when people chewed cinnamon bark so hard their gums bled. Now, they just smell like soap. You nod. You both agree that soap is an improvement, if not a cure. As night falls, you return home, swish one last rinse of lilac-infused vinegar, and settle into your chair with your now perfumed book on hygiene. You read about breath potions sold at court, tiny vials worn around the neck, broken discreetly before dances. One duchess was said to carry a sprig of mint under her tongue at all times, which made speaking tricky but sighing delightful. You close the book and yawn. Your mouth is still tingling slightly, not unpleasantly, just fragrantly. You wonder what they'd think of toothbrushes now, of floss, of bubblegum toothpaste and battery-powered sonic wands. Probably too loud, too foreign, too clinical, but certainly less lilac. You snuff the candle roll into bed and let the last breath of floral mint rise softly into the quiet. It's late morning when you find yourself wandering south of the Seine, following the smell of roasted chestnuts and the distant clang of what sounds suspiciously like a disagreement involving pots and probably someone's cousin. The air is crisp, the streets are lively, and you, friend, are on a mission because today's subject is scandalous, competitive, and only slightly ridiculous, the dental duelists of Saint-Michel. You round a corner and arrive at Place Maubert, once a quiet, bookish square, but in certain seasons a hotbed for what can only be described as competitive dentistry. Because in 18th century Paris, if pulling teeth didn't bring the crowds a good performance, certainly would. You've heard the stories. Everyone has. On market days, rival practitioners, barber surgeons, amateur molar wrestlers, and semi-legitimate tooth professors would set up their makeshift booths here, each one promising the quickest, most painless, and most affordable extractions in all of Paris. The only catch: they were often situated within shouting distance of each other. You reach the square and picture it alive, banners waving, instruments gleaming in the sun, and crowds gathering in curious clumps to watch as a gentleman in a stained coat tried to out-yell his equally loud competitor. It was dentistry as street theater. One Professor Denton, as he styled himself, was known to shout, "I can pull your tooth and your sorrows in a single twist." His rival across the way, Monsieur Armand le Molariste, would reply, "Yes, but he'll keep both for himself." You chuckle just imagining it. The flair, the drama, the sheer gall. Historians still argue whether these duels were staged spontaneous or simply marketing tactics gone feral. Some accounts claim actual tools were brandished like weapons, not in mouths, but mid-air, each man showing off his preferred forceps like a knight revealing his sword. Crowds loved it. Bets were placed. Cheers erupted when someone fainted dramatically. It wasn't about the medicine. It was about the show. You stop by a food vendor selling hot wine and buy a small cup. It's too sweet and vaguely medicinal, perfect for the moment. You sip slowly, imagining the rustle of wigs, the stomping of impatient feet, and the soft moans of people wondering if a toothache is truly worse than this level of public humiliation. One duel even ended with both dentists attempting to extract the same tooth on the same patient at once. The patient reportedly passed out, woke up with a coin in his hand, and fewer molars than he'd started with. Another time, Armand the Molariste offered free extractions to anyone who could recite a poem while he worked. Only one man succeeded. His reward: a second free extraction, which he politely declined. You stroll further into the square, your breath visible in the late-season chill. The surrounding buildings watch quietly, stone and soot and whispers. You imagine what these old stones have heard. Don't trust the one with the crimson apron. That wasn't a tooth, it was a walnut. I came for turnips and left with a gap-toothed smile. These weren't just dental duels. They were public rituals, proof that the art of pulling pain from a face could be performed with flair and just a hint of theater grease. At the edge of the square, a plaque marks where a barber once set up his healing chair, a contraption part, stool part, stocks. You sit on a nearby bench and picture it a man in a frock coat holding a giant pair of tongs calling to the crowd like a carnival barker. Step up, lose a tooth, gain a tail. You sigh contentedly. This city. It finds poetry in the absurd. Not all duelists were fools. Some were genuinely skilled, quick, precise, respected. But the lines between showman and surgeon were always blurred. If you wore a big enough wig and shouted loud enough, sometimes no one noticed your patient was missing more than just a tooth. Fringe practitioners even hired musicians' small bands to play as they worked. One barber reportedly coordinated extractions with drum beats. The rhythm masked the screams. You finish your wine and rise. As you walk home, the sun begins to dip, turning the rooftops gold and the cobbles silver. Paris glows, the same way it did on those long-ago market days when the square pulsed with pain, laughter, and just a touch of bleeding gums. Back at your flat, you brush your teeth slowly, chuckling at the memory of Professor Denton's boast, "I pull with love, never haste." You spit, rinse, wipe your mouth. You pause, look in the mirror and whisper, "I could have taken them both." Just for fun. You climb into bed, the covers warm, the air still carrying a faint scent of cloves and memory. Your jaw feels fine. Your mind buzzes with images, gleaming tools, waving banners, and two flamboyant men trying to win a crowd with a tooth and a grin. You fall asleep smiling, wondering who actually won that day. Maybe it was the patient. Probably not. The next morning greets you with a sound you've come to associate with either celebration or catastrophe. A loud clack followed by a low, drawn-out groan and a muffled oath in French. You blink, stretch, and peek your head out the window just in time to see your upstairs neighbor, Madame Fournier, drop something from her balcony. It's teeth. Or rather, a tooth. A rather large, slightly yellowed, and extremely artificial one that now lies dramatically on the cobblestone like it's rethinking its life choices. You throw on your cloak and head out partly from curiosity, partly out of neighborly obligation. Madame Fournier is already downstairs in her morning gown, clutching her jaw and glaring at the escapee like it personally betrayed her. "It's the second one this month," she grumbles, scooping it up. "I told that charlatan ivory was too soft." And just like that, you've been handed the perfect segue into tonight's next Curiosity False Teeth 18th Century Paris's favorite solution to all that sweet-fueled, worm-theorized, toothless chaos. You walk with Madame Fournier to her preferred dental fabricator, a term she uses with the gravity of someone ordering a chandelier, not a chewable body part. The shop sits discreetly behind a dressmaker's storefront on Rue du Jour. There's no sign, just a polished brass bell and the faint scent of beeswax and crushed chalk. Inside the room is filled with tiny, delicate tools. Files mold scraps of ivory. One cabinet is entirely dedicated to various tooth shapes, molars, incisors, canines, arranged like a botanical collection from someone who never studied plants but has strong opinions about smiles. Monsieur Delacroix, the dental artisan, greets Madame Fournier with a look of well-practiced sympathy. Another he asks, already reaching for his box of adhesives. She waves the fallen tooth like a surrender flag. The left bicuspid, mid-conversation. It landed in my soup. You leave her to her repairs and quietly explore the shop. You marvel at the materials bone, ivory, even wood, which somehow feels more tragic than practical. There's also porcelain, a newer material, delicate but fashionable, and according to Delacroix, occasionally prone to shattering during surprise laughter. Historians still debate which false teeth were the most successful in 18th century Europe. Some say ivory was king, fashionable, carvable, and pale. Others argue that human teeth, yes, real teeth taken from donors or the dead, provided the best fit. A rather grim market, but one that thrived especially after battles when demand and supply collided in unsettling harmony. You spot a pair of dentures on display made of carved ivory and held together with gold wire. They're beautiful. They're also completely terrifying. Do these work, you ask? Monsieur Delacroix shrugs. If you don't chew too hard, or speak too quickly, or sneeze. The adhesives used, you learn, are a blend of beeswax natural resins and, on bold days, a touch of softened pine tar. Effective sometimes. Tasty, never. You recall reading about a woman who laughed too forcefully at a salon and launched her front teeth directly into a footman's lap. Another story involves a nobleman whose dentures clicked so loudly mid-proposal that his intended believed it was a hidden insult. She married someone else with a quieter bite. But fashion, as always, trumped function. Teeth were not just tools for eating. They were social signals. Gaps were concealed. Smiles rehearsed. Some elites even had jeweled inlays, tiny diamonds, or enamel flowers set into prosthetic teeth meant to dazzle, not digest. Fringe accounts mention a short-lived trend of musical teeth false molars drilled in such a way that they produced a whistling note when the wearer exhaled with flair. It did not catch on. Back in Delacroix's shop, Madame Fournier has completed her reattachment. She tests her smile in a hand mirror and nods with royal solemnity. Acceptable, she pronounces. At least until soup happens again. You escort her home and then continue walking through the city, watching the way people move their mouths. You notice things now, tight-lipped smiles, careful sips, discreet coughs. The marks of dental compromise hidden beneath powdered grace. At a cafe, you overhear a young man explaining how he had his two front teeth replaced with carved boar tusk. Harder than ivory, he says proudly, before adding that he can no longer whistle. You make your way home at sunset, pockets slightly dusted with tooth powder and thoughts. Your own mouth feels strange, suddenly more fragile, more miraculous. The fact that your real teeth remain mostly in place seems like a quiet victory. Back in your flat, you light a candle and sip warm cider, watching the flame dance as night settles in. You think about Madame Fournier's tooth lying dramatically in her soup, about the men who wore mouthfuls of other men's molars, about the artisans who carved smiles from tusk and bone and hope. You smile to yourself carefully, then brush. Twice. Gently. You rise the next morning to a knock at your door, firm, polite, and timed to exactly the kind of hour when most people are debating their second piece of bread, not their place in fashion history. You open it to find a boy in powdered livery clutching a folded card, edged in gold, and looking extremely unimpressed by your bedhead. A message, he says, handing it over and turning with the kind of speed only servants and startled pigeons truly master. You unfold the card. It's an invitation, formal embossed and unnecessarily perfumed. You're being summoned, not to a court, not to a medical lecture, but to a fashion salon. And the topic Dental adornments, the intersection of elegance and enamel. Of course. You spend the morning preparing brushing with charcoal, dabbing your gums with rose water, smoothing your hair into something less resembling a haystack. By midday, you're seated in a modest but overly mirrored salon, surrounded by aristocrats who look like they've never personally chewed anything tougher than a custard tart. At the front of the room stands a woman known only as Madame Duchesne, a figure famous for her elaborate fashion talks, and for once wearing a hat that accidentally housed a live bird. She welcomes everyone, fans herself theatrically, and begins, "Ladies, gentlemen," and the fashionably molar curious she purrs. Today we explore the latest trends in dental ornamentation. You blink. This is new. She gestures to an assistant who unveils a small table of items, jeweled tooth caps, enameled molar shields, and what appears to be a platinum incisor designed to resemble a lily. The modern smile Madame Duchesne continues must sparkle not only with charm, but with design. Historians still argue whether this trend, brief and largely restricted to the elite, was truly about aesthetics or merely a desperate attempt to distract from missing or rotting teeth. Likely both. It began, she explains, in the early 1780s with enamel painting, a practice where front teeth were coated with white porcelain powder mixed with water and painted delicately onto discolored enamel. From there, things escalated. By the mid-1780s, fashion journals advertised diamond-inlaid bicuspids, silver-trimmed canines, and in one bold case, a sapphire-studded bridge. One duchess reportedly had a tiny golden T placed on her front tooth, visible only when she laughed. The audience today murmurs in appreciation. You're still trying to wrap your head around the idea of willingly attaching a gemstone to your molar. An assistant passes around a tray for close inspection. You lift one piece delicately, a capped tooth carved from ivory, gilded at the edge, meant to sit over a real tooth like a decorative helmet. It's light, ridiculously so, but also absurdly fragile. You could sneeze and crack it. There's also a scroll detailing popular designs, teeth painted to match gowns, gold leaf on wisdom teeth, floral carvings on dentures for private appreciation. You resist the urge to ask what that means. Madame Duchesne offers a demonstration. A volunteer clearly rehearsed steps forward and flashes a smile featuring two opalescent premolars flecked with silver. She looks pleased. She also looks vaguely afraid to speak in case one comes loose. You learn that these adornments were often held in place with wax or soft gold wire. Eating was discouraged. So was sudden laughter heat, or chewing on anything harder than whipped cream. You glance around the room. Most attendees are watching with fascination, but a few are already discreetly touching their mouths, calculating costs, perhaps planning which teeth to sacrifice for fashion. Fringe stories claim that one Parisian noblewoman had her entire upper set replaced with mother of pearl. She dazzled guests at parties and never once ate in public. Eventually, her teeth cracked during an impromptu waltz-related sneeze. Madame Duchesne finishes her talk with a flourish, handing out small samples of tooth polish for the socially gifted, and encourages all attendees to decorate responsibly. You pocket your sample and leave with a head full of questions. Mostly why, but also how expensive was that lily incisor out on the street? The city hums along. You pass a boy hawking gingerbread shaped like molars, a woman feeding pigeons with crumbs from what smells like rose biscuits, and a young man gazing at his reflection in a spoon while testing the whiteness of his teeth. Back at home, you examine your own teeth in your modest, slightly tarnished mirror. They're clean, mostly aligned, still yours. You try to picture yourself with a jeweled canine. It doesn't work. You imagine smiling at someone and their only response being, "Did your tooth twinkle?" And yet you understand. Paris is a city built on appearances, on beauty, on impression. If your shoes sparkle and your hat sings, why not your teeth? As night settles in, you try the sample polish from the salon. It tastes like mint lemon and a faint hint of insecurity. You brush gently, watching the flicker of candlelight bounce off your reflection. You don't shine, but you're solid. And that in Paris is sometimes the boldest fashion of all. You awaken to the sound of hooves clattering against stone, the faint rustle of silk somewhere beyond your shutters, and a pressure behind your left cheek that could only mean one thing. Someone important has a toothache, and it isn't you. You're still blinking sleep from your eyes when a knock echoes through the stairwell. It's another messenger, same livery, more urgent eyebrows. This one carries a smaller, fancier envelope sealed with an insignia you don't recognize. Until you do. The royal seal. You stare at it for a full 10 seconds before remembering how to move your feet. You tear the envelope open and scan the contents, your lips moving silently as you take in the ridiculous, glorious reality you are being invited, no summoned, to observe a dental consultation at Versailles. Because the king's molar is misbehaving. The carriage arrives before you can fully pack your things. You barely remember your shoes. You're bundled into the plush interior and off you go, rattling past fields, groves, and occasional confused geese bound for the heart of decadence and discomfort. Versailles rises like a dream, built by someone who's never heard the word moderation. You're ushered past golden gates, marble fountains, and a hall of mirrors so long you could walk its length and still not escape your own reflection. Eventually, you reach a small salon, private, paneled in pale blue silk, and unnervingly quiet. Inside, an older man in a powdered wig and a cloak that likely costs more than your entire wardrobe stands fidgeting by a divan. Beside him sits King Louis XVI, holding the side of his face like it's just betrayed him in public. The room smells faintly of cloves worry and warm velvet. A physician, 2 surgeons, and 1 visibly terrified valet stand to the side, clutching implements that look ceremonial but slightly blood-stained. You're told to observe, not speak. The king groans something in a voice only vaguely French. The physician clears his throat and begins a slow, careful examination, assisted by a candle and what might be a silver fishhook. The murmurs begin inflammation, possible infection, foreign obstruction. One man suggests a rinse, another recommends leeches. Louis mutters again. Someone hands him a sugar-dusted pastry. He holds it like he wants to punish it. Historians still argue whether this infamous episode, the Royal Molar Crisis of 1785, was real or dramatized for court gossip. Some believe the king suffered an abscess. Others suspect it was a cracked tooth exacerbated by stress sweets and whispered political unrest. Fringe theories suggest it was symbolic a monarchy beginning to rot from the inside out. The physicians debate. They disagree. One insists on immediate extraction. Another proposes cauterizing the gum. A third suggests summoning a German expert, which earns him a dangerous look from the court secretary. At some point, the Queen appears. Marie Antoinette, powdered and poised, enters with the air of someone trying very hard not to say, "Just yank it." She offers the king a small bottle of lavender water. He waves it away. She pats his arm, turns to the room, and says, "Perhaps the bearman could assist you freeze." Everyone looks at you. You are not ready for this. You approach the king. Slowly. You bow. You examine lightly at a respectful distance. You nod. "It's a molar," you say helpfully. The court waits. You suggest clove oil rest and softened foods for the time being. The court physician frowns. The queen smirks. The king grunts in what might be approval. Your advice remarkably is taken, and so the day ends with no screaming, no forced extractions, and no royal tears, just a lumpy cheek, a wary smile, and a court full of people whispering that maybe you're the next great Parisian dental sage. You are given a small token of appreciation wrapped in satin and a carriage ride home that feels several degrees warmer than before. Back in Paris, you walk the evening streets in a haze of disbelief and mild embarrassment. The token turns out to be a gold toothpick, etched with lilies. You tuck it carefully into your drawer. Later that night, you sit by your fire and consider what you've just seen. A king in agony, surrounded by men with titles and lace, who still can't decide if a tooth should be poked, pulled, or prayed over. You wonder if he's sleeping now. You wonder if his molar dreams of rebellion. You brush slowly, carefully, whispering thanks to your still loyal teeth. And as you slip into bed, the candle flickering low, you smile at the absurdity of it all. Your molars don't know it, but they've just attended court. You wake with a yawn and a jaw that is for once entirely neutral. No pulsing, no pressure, no moral dilemmas about which powdered root to chew. Just the ordinary stiffness of someone who has spent too many nights brushing with burnt breadcrumbs and worrying about royal molars. The sky outside is pale. The streets below hum quietly, still stretching themselves into motion. You wrap yourself in your cloak and make for your usual cafe, but along the way you're intercepted by the most Parisian of obstacles, a public notice nailed to a lamp-post and already being scrutinized by a group of toothless onlookers. It reads, "All dental practitioners operating without licensure are to cease work immediately. Violators will be fined or detained. Official endorsement required for molar-related procedures." You sigh. Regulation has arrived. But it's not the new rule that gets your attention, it's the chaos it's already caused. Because nearby, standing in the square and waving a half-plucked chicken like a legal argument, is Alain the tooth wager, a fringe dentist, whose methods include singing to patients mid-extraction and consulting a deck of stained playing cards to determine which tooth is next. He is not taking the news well. "Licensure!" he shouts. "I have pulled teeth from nobles' nuns and one surprisingly strong nun, and never once was I asked for a paper." Someone suggests gently that perhaps paperwork would help. He throws the chicken. You keep walking. Your path takes you to the quieter side of Rue Saint-Antoine, where a small, cluttered building serves as both home and practice to Madame Le Maire, a known herbalist and letter writer with a side interest in teeth. Her front room smells like thyme beeswax and singed optimism. She greets you with a tired smile and hands you a bundle. "More letters," she says, "from clients. You like stories. These are dental stories." You sit beside her and open the bundle. The first is from a man named Henri, a watchmaker who writes, "Madame, the clove mixture you prepared did soothe my tooth for 3 days. On the 4th it fell out while I bit into a prune. I am grateful, but also sad." The prune was very good. You nod. That tracks. Another letter is more dramatic. I believe the spirit of my third molar is restless. The herbs you sent made it sing at night. Should I apologize to it? You raise an eyebrow. Madame Lemaire shrugs. The singing stopped, apparently. Yet another, I rubbed your balm on my sore gums and shortly thereafter forgot my own name for 3 hours. Please advise if this is part of the treatment or a separate issue. You both agree it was probably the balm. Probably. Historians still debate whether these herbalists, often women rarely formally trained, were early scientists, superstitious meddlers, or both. They offered something the barbers couldn't: gentleness, patience, the illusion of magic when medicine ran out of ideas. And they were often more beloved than the official surgeons. Because where else could you find someone who'd write a letter to your tooth and then boil it in elderflower tea just to see if the ache would pass? You ask Madame Lemaire if any of her remedies actually work. She smiles sly and soft. Some do, most don't. But the belief that's strong, and sometimes stronger than the pain. You spend the afternoon helping her copy out another batch of instructions. For bleeding gums, rinse with warm sage tea. If pain persists, hold a warm coin between the cheek and gum and recite a prayer to Saint Apollonia. The coin part, she confesses, is mostly to keep people distracted. The chicken from earlier wanders by the window, still understandably distressed. You both ignore it. As evening settles in, you thank Madame Lemaire and return home, the bundle of letters tucked under your arm like a strange new novella. You think of Henri and his brave prune, the singing molar, the warm coin prayer. You think of all the ways people try to take control of their bodies in a world where medicine often feels more performance than progress. Back in your flat, you light a single candle and read one final letter aloud to the empty room. It's unsigned, barely legible, written on the back of a pastry receipt. The balm did not help, but your kindness did. I no longer fear the pain. I think it has started to fear me. You smile, tuck the letter into your drawer, and prepare for bed. Your teeth are fine tonight. Your mind is full. And somewhere in the city, a chicken roosts in protest, a man whispers to his molars, and a tired herbalist writes another letter, one tooth at a time. You wake to thunder. Not from the sky, but from the city itself, boots on cobblestones, bells ringing from the church towers, voices raised in chorus but not in song. The air feels electric. You step to the window and peer out at a Paris that is changing faster than anyone expected. The revolution has begun. And while bread taxes and monarchy are the central players in this drama, you, dear friend, are watching from a stranger angle because you're about to witness what happens when dentistry meets revolution. The streets are alive. Pamphlets flutter like birds. Angry declarations are painted hastily on walls, some about liberty, some about flour, and somehow one about the criminal injustice of molar extractions at inflated prices. The people are not just hungry. They're fed up. You pull on your cloak and head toward the city center, weaving through shouting crowds, sidestepping a man trying to sell revolutionary shoe polish, now patriotically red, and passing a pair of wig makers, furiously debating whether powdered hair counts as aristocratic. In front of the Hôtel de Ville, a small group has gathered around a makeshift stage. You recognize the speaker, barber Jean-Francois, once famous for extracting teeth while whistling opera arias. Now he's yelling about fairness. Why, he demands, should the poor suffer rotting teeth while nobles line up for golden molars and mother-of-pearl incisors? The crowd roars. He holds up a set of dental tools like holy relics. This is not just steel. It is justice. You slowly back away. Historians still argue whether any real dental reform took place during the Revolution, but anecdotal accounts paint a vivid picture. Barber surgeons formed guilds. Herbalists found sudden respectability or sudden danger depending on their clientele. Royal dentists, once envied and protected, became targets for their proximity to powdered power. A man in the crowd next to you mutters, "My cousin had all his molars replaced with porcelain." Said it was the future. Now he can't chew celery without sounding like a church bell. You nod solemnly. Celery has no place in a fragile world. Down Rue de la Ferronnerie, you pass a dentist's shop boarded up. Someone scrawled "Enemy of the People" across the shutters. Another sign underneath reads, "Closed due to biting." You keep walking. The revolution does not spare teeth. That evening, you're invited to a quiet gathering, what used to be called a salon, now cautiously referred to as an informal discussion. The hostess, once the queen of fashionably perfumed mouth rinses, serves weak tea and dry biscuits. Times are shifting, she says, sipping delicately. The gold is gone. I'm considering clove water. Everyone nods gravely. Someone whispers that the queen once had her own molars replaced not for pain, but for appearance. Now those same molars sit abandoned in a drawer somewhere in Versailles, whispering court secrets to the dust. You return home under a sky split by lanterns and stars. The air feels different, heavier. But somewhere on the wind, you catch the faint scent of mint and beeswax, a reminder that even in turmoil, someone somewhere is brushing their teeth by candlelight. You light your own candle and sit by the fire. Your charcoal tin is nearly empty. You add that to your growing list of uncertain luxuries, salt warmth, toothpaste. You brush slowly, not just for hygiene, for ritual, for defiance. Because in a city tearing itself apart and stitching itself back together, even a clean tooth feels like a small, stubborn act of hope. You spit, rinse, wipe your mouth, and whisper, "Liberté, égalité, molarité." You chuckle quietly, though you can't be sure your teeth don't groan in response. You climb into bed. The city outside is still murmuring like it's trying to remember how to sleep. Your jaw is steady, your breath faintly herbal, your heart cautious. Tomorrow Paris may change again, but tonight your teeth are yours, and that will do. By morning, the streets are quieter, not silent. Paris is never silent, but calmer, like the city has exhaled after holding its breath for too long. You rise, slowly stretch, and find yourself craving something that isn't revolution or reform or resentment. You want routine. So you decide to visit the Museum of Curiosities tucked near the Jardin des Plantes, where oddities are catalogued, whispered about, and only slightly exaggerated. You've heard tales of its collections, fossilized frogs, shrunken gloves, and, yes, rumor has it a display dedicated entirely to dental history. You wrap your scarf tightly and set off. Along the way, you pass remnants of protests, slogans half-washed from walls, pamphlets trampled into cobblestones, one of which reads "Down," with the molar aristocracy in florid script. The museum is surprisingly open. You pay with a copper coin and a raised eyebrow, then step into a world curated by eccentric minds with too much time and too many jars. You pass the usual suspects, a two-headed duck, a violin made of bone, and a painting of a bishop frowning at a turnip. But you don't linger, not today. You follow the signs labeled medical traditions and make your way to a small dusty wing titled Oral History's Teeth Through the Ages. There it is. The entire back wall is dedicated to 18th century dental instruments. There's the infamous pelican, the metal tool designed to lever teeth from jaws with all the grace of a crowbar. Next to it sits the tooth key, a twisted wrench-like device used to twist teeth free, often bringing a bonus chunk of gum with it. You wince instinctively. A plaque describes a gentle extraction technique once taught by French military surgeons. The key to success. Distraction speed and a firm grip on the patient's head. You chuckle. Nothing says gentle like a headlock. Nearby sits a glass case with samples of false teeth from carved ivory to porcelain to an eerie row labeled donor teeth. Human. Sourced from soldiers, the desperate and occasionally less than willing participants. Historians still argue whether the famous Waterloo teeth ever reached Paris, but the black market trade in second-hand molars was very real. Some poor soul's premolar might have graced the smile of a duchess who refused to chew with anything less than peasant authenticity. Beside that display, someone has placed a delicate bowl labeled early tooth powders. A list of ingredients follows crushed bone salt, oyster shell pepper dried mint, and occasionally brick dust. You smile. You've tried most of those, some voluntarily. In the final alcove, you find a short timeline, the rise of barbers, the decline of toothworm theories, the first printed book on oral health. The last panel, crudely hand-lettered, reads, "And now we floss." You linger for a long while in front of a wax diorama, a lady in silk fainting as her tooth is yanked by a man with sleeves rolled and a look of grim determination. A small child watches in horror. A dog eats the dropped tooth. It's perfect. On your way out, you pass the guest book. You flip it open. The last entry reads, "Too many teeth. Not enough sense." You add your own, "Thank you for reminding me to be gentle with my gums." The wind outside has picked up. Leaves scatter along the sidewalk like gossip. You head home, one hand on your scarf, the other lightly touching your jaw, not from pain, but memory. Once home, you take your time brushing. Charcoal clove slow circles. The tin is nearly empty now, but you make it count. You spit, rinse, smile at the mirror. Not perfect, but yours. You settle into your chair, warm by the fire, your book open but unread. Your thoughts drift back through powdered salons, tooth duels, waxy smiles, perfumed mouth rinses, and a king too proud to admit he'd been bested by a molar. You survived 18th century dentistry. You deserve a biscuit, one without nuts, or sugar, or ambition. You lie in bed, blanket pulled to your chin. City sounds fading to a gentle murmur. Somewhere out there, someone is brushing for the first time tonight, trying not to flinch. Somewhere else, a tooth aches quietly in the dark. You whisper a small blessing for them, and for your own mouth still intact, still chewing, still smiling. And now, let your jaw soften. Let the tension drain from your cheeks, your lips, your brow. You've made it through powdered parlors, mercury pastes, clove tinctures, and tooth duels in crowded markets. You've sat beside queens with wax smiles and watched revolution flicker behind molars. And now, here you are, safe, still, quiet. The candlelight dances gently across your walls. The air is cool against your skin, but you're wrapped in warmth like a patient under a woolen coverlet, waiting not for the pull of a tooth, but for the pull of sleep. You've wandered through a time when mouths were mystery, when medicine met vanity in a swirl of chalk and perfume. And now every step, every crooked grin, every powdered cheek has faded into softness. Your tongue rests against your teeth. Your breath is slow, steady, silent. Nothing to prove. No lectures left. No more mouth rinses with violet vinegar or powdered oyster shell. Just quiet. Just peace. Just a full set of dreams waiting perfectly aligned behind your tired smile. Close your eyes now and let it all fade. The cobblestones, the clove-scented salons, the giggling nobles, the gold-trimmed dentures. Gone now. Only breath. Only warmth. Only sleep. End of script. Sweet dreams.